welcome everybody who is joining us for this surroundings on February edition for MPavilion. We would like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri and Wairarung and Yalukit Weelam and Boonwurrung as the traditional custodians of the lands on which MPavilion is situated and on which this event is hosted. We also acknowledge the traditional custodians of the various lands on which you are all watching and participating today, and the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people participating in this event. We pay our respects to elders past, present, and emerging, and celebrate the diversity of Aboriginal peoples and their ongoing cultures and connections to the lands and waters of Victoria and across Australia.
Thanks, Simon. Welcome, everyone. My name is Lauren Taylor, with co-host Simon Winkler, who you just heard from. Normally you can find us hosting Breaking and Entering on Triple R on Thursday afternoons. But this is the surrounding series as part of MPavilion's MTalks. We were hoping to have this discussion in person at MPavilion's Parkade Hub, but things changed quite rapidly on Friday afternoon. And here we are on Zoom after another Melbourne lockdown. Thank you so much to MPavilion for turning this around in an online event capacity so quickly. Perhaps it's appropriate for a discussion about connection and technology and communication that we find ourselves on Zoom tonight. We're here to ask, with so many barriers in our path, how can we meaningfully and fully connect with others as we look at MPavilion's theme for February, which is 1+1, who are we together? There's a lot to cover with tonight's panel, and our guests joining us this evening, we have Jody Mundy, OAM, Creative Director and Performer, Niels Wouters, Head of Research at Science Gallery, Melbourne, and Mindy Menwang, a musician, composer, and Guzhong performing artist. Over the course of the next hour, we hope to hear more about the different ways our guests are exploring the evolution of communication, empathy, and our capacity for understanding beyond words. And this conversation tonight also covers our expanding dialogue with AI. We should also mention at the end of the conversation, we'll hope to get to a few audience questions as well, which you can enter in the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen, and we'll try to get to as many as we can before we get out of here. I'd like to start maybe with each of the guests by introducing yourself quickly, telling us a bit about your background and how it relates to this particular discussion. Mindy, I've got you up on my screen. I might start with you if you wouldn't mind introducing.
I felt like from the order I should be the last. Okay, well, my name is Mindy Menwang. I'm a composer and performing artist. The instrument guzheng I perform, well, my main instrument is a really, really traditional ancient Chinese musical instrument. So my main practice is just basically around how to modernize this instrument, how to break the barrier between Western and Eastern music with this instrument, and cross cultures, cross disciplines, and you know, cross genres. Yeah, that's what I do.
Excellent. How about you, Niels?
Yeah, hello everyone. And first, to add to Mindy's intro, Mindy's music is indeed fabulous. I've had the opportunity to hear it live, and I'm sure we'll touch upon that in the rest of this talk, of this panel. But it is indeed absolutely mesmerizing. I'm conscious I'm stealing off my 30 seconds. So I'm Niels Wouters. I'm indeed Head of Research at Science Gallery, where together with a fantastic team, I co-curate academic collaborations with the artists whose works we have on display as part of our seasons. And for those who are still often or occasionally in the CBD, we are about to open a gallery in a month's time or 2 months' time, if all stays on track as it currently is. Besides Head of Research, I'm also a research fellow in the School of Computing and Information Systems, where I predominantly look at how technology influences us in society and how it influences society as a whole. I often take a sort of action-based research approach where I demonstrate to members of the public that some technologies come with challenges and come with serious considerations for us all to look into. Yeah, that's what I do.
Excellent. And finally, Jody.
Hi, thank you, Simon, for acknowledgement of country. My name's Jody Mundy. I am a creative director and a performer. I'm the festival director of Fuse, which is Darebin's new contemporary arts festival, which launched last year but was cancelled on the night because it was the first lockdown. So we are now about to launch again. And hoping that that will happen. And also with my artistic practice, I create installations and shows and performances exploring communication. Everyone in my family is deaf except for me. So Auslan is my native language. So I come from the deaf community. So I guess a bit like Mindy Men Wang, bridging worlds of sign language and spoken languages and allowing people to see each other in ways that they may not understand. So yeah, bringing together those worlds. And I do that in my practice as a festival director and as an artist, not only across sign language works, but also with other communities as well.
Brilliant. You're all so very deeply and uniquely qualified to address all of the questions that we have today. And as Lauren was mentioning before, the topic 1+1, who are we together? And so we were thinking for the purposes of this discussion on Zoom, we'll certainly get to everybody and ask some very specific questions about your work and practice. But we might sort of zero in potentially on a couple of case studies. So perhaps Jody, if we could begin with your work, as you mentioned, such a diverse portfolio of activities, and yeah, the introduction that you just gave barely scrapes the surface of the numerous sort of enterprises and undertakings that you're involved with. You have a very unique understanding of communication, and your artistic aim, as stated on your website, is for audiences to witness works that challenge and inspire them to acknowledge the value of live performance and communities. It's also encouraging them to redefine and skew their notions of inclusiveness. Can you tell us a little bit more about this and why it's important?
I guess, what on earth did I mean by that when I wrote that a long time ago? Look, really, I think we box each other, we put each other into separate categories, and there's not enough intersectionality and bleeding in of identities. And I suppose that's what that is about, is that through art forms, through working with different communities and collaborations, we can start to skew notions of inclusiveness, that doesn't have to be box ticking and something that we should do, but it's actually the way forward, that the more we work together and understand each other, the more inclusion will become innate. It's not even a word anymore. It's something that we do, that we practice.
Absolutely. And that word is so important, inclusivity. And we are, as you say, much more connected when we listen to each other and when we acknowledge the other person's perspective, and we sort of start to ignore some of those boundaries or boxes that we separate ourselves by. Can you tell us a little bit about how you are encouraging people to be better listeners, and how indeed you have become such a good listener in your life?
Well, the people who taught me to listen were deaf people. I know, ironic. People would think, what? But actually, I think, yeah, it's deaf people who have taught me how to listen. And that's not just with my ears, but also with my eyes and with my heart, with my body. And I would say the wonderful thing about sign languages is that, unlike spoken language, when you speak with your tongue, which is one articulator which makes syllables. And that is across the form in many languages. But in sign languages, we have 3 articulators. So you have 2 hands and your face. And the beauty of that is that with sign languages, you can communicate, underwater. You can talk in the dark and use tactile sign language. So I guess my point is, as someone who grew up, who speaks, but also signs and also knows tactile communication, there's a lot of advantages to knowing many modes of communicating, not just it's not by being bilingual, but bimodal as well, which is pretty cool.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And to go a little bit deeper into that idea of tactile communication, there is a number of works in which you're exploring this. And I suppose one excellent example was Imagined Touch, which was created over many years. And the whole work is really about how to awaken everybody to the power of tactile communication. Could you tell us a little bit more about this work and how it was designed and how it affected audiences?
Yeah, sure. I actually got this poster behind me. It's when we took the show to the Barbican, which was really exciting. But that show was created with two women who were deafblind, both who they don't see or hear. And one of them is a pianist, which Mindy, I think you would love to know more about. So with these two artists, we create, and a whole team of artists like Madeleine Flynn and Tim Humphrey, Jen Hector, a group of us, we created a show, a documentary, a report, and an immersive installation where you could not do this now because of COVID, but it's literally wearing goggles and headsets and going into this space and talking to each other through touch and being immersed in the culture of deafblind people. And it's where able-bodied people become completely lose their sight and hearing, while deaf and deafblind people are guiding you into their world and teaching you practices and cultural practices and communication. So many people left feeling like their senses had been awakened and realizing that it wasn't just about disability, but actually we can all do this, which is, what I've been raised to do. And I guess I wanted to create that work. So it's about skewing notions of inclusion. Again, it's something that we can all do. It's not just sort of left to those people or those people. So that was a big work. It's still going. The documentary is almost finished, and it's been a 9-year project in the making. But I don't think it will ever tour again because we can't touch each other at the moment. The work has died, but hopefully the documentary lives on.
Well, we hope that it does, and that there is some opportunity for those who haven't been fortunate to experience it to certainly be in that space that you've created and to have that experience as well.
Thank you.
Well, we'll talk more about that work in a moment. We wanted to bring in, I guess, Niels and Mindy at this point as well to talk about a project that you've been working together on, a fascinating project that's very relevant to this discussion, called the Biometric Mirror. Niels, would you be able to briefly share maybe the story of the Biometric Mirror, how it was developed, what were your intentions behind this program?
Yeah, sure, I'd love to. And I've got to apologize beforehand. I've been getting notifications that my internet connection is unstable. So by all means, if I do drop out, Mindy, take over and defend the ship. Look, I think it's probably important to know that for that work specifically, my background comes into play. I'm an architect by training, and that's just to give you a bit of context. Whereas Biometric Mirror is a very high-tech, AI-driven machine learning work. So these two worlds, at first sight, you'd imagine they're kind of completely perpendicular and have no relationship. But as an architect, I'm trained to sit down with people, understand, say, a design brief or design requirements, understand how a design can meet your expectations and so on. And then sort of becoming immersed in the technology world and technology scene, you do notice that very often technology products are delivered or are built without there being a clear ask by clients and really are forced upon us. I'm angrily looking at my iPhone right now, which is probably one of those products that forced upon us. But if you take that a few steps further, you're also looking at artificial intelligence solutions that more and more are being rolled out globally for policing purposes, surveillance purposes, automating. And in Australia, we don't necessarily have a particularly good track record. Robodebt, I'm sure that many of you are aware of what happened there. So really allowing algorithms to run their own life or have their own life. So with Biometric Mirror, which at the moment is about, I think, a 2 or 3 year old project, I really set out to develop one of those controversial, thought-provoking artificial intelligence systems, for lack of a better word, but one that would really allow members of the public to immerse themselves in it and really understand, first of all, what artificial intelligence is about without really having to talk about the technicalities, algorithms, and so on, but also really understanding how potentially they could be affected by an AI. So what Biometric Mirror is, in a nutshell, is a crowdsourced system of photos that allows you as a visitor or as a member of the public to step in front of a camera, take your photo, and will then compare your facial photo with the thousands of photos that are in our proprietary system. So we'll never share anything. And we can then give you an idea of what your sort of psychometric attitude or psychometric profile is. And it's not without reason that there's this phrenology hat behind me. So really what Biometric Mirror can do is, apart from distinguishing or guessing your age and ethnicity, it can also, or it pretends to identify how weird you are as a person, how emotionally stable or unstable, how responsible, you name it, we probably are able to identify that. But it also then displays a speculative scenario to you. Imagine that this data is used against you. Imagine, for instance, you're perceived to be an aggressive person, and out of an abundance of caution, police is notified and they're suddenly allowed to monitor or surveil your movements. Similarly, imagine you're perceived to be very attractive, and imagine that social networks can then do anything they want with your photos. So that's the sort of background about Biometric Mirror. It's very much a research project, and as researchers, we're not always great at engaging audiences, as you might be well aware. So we are very good at writing papers and articles and such, but really involving the public in that discussion is not always that easy. And through the connections with Science Gallery, through the connections within the University of Melbourne, we've established this really great collaboration with Mindy, who jumped on board and really took a radical sort of reappropriation, rethinking of that entire project. Mindy, are you happy to jump in and explain what you did to the project?
Right. Okay, so I can tell more in the story way. Like, you know, when I first met Niels, it was at Splendor in the Grass. And there was so many young people, like what I saw is like they present this Biometric Mirror, like at the whereas they can, you can go and take photo and this AI program is going to tell you everything about you, basically like that. And what happens, like you saying, so many people are queuing up and they're just so happy. And what happens, a lot of people, when they get answers that they don't like to read, for example, they look older than their real age, or if the AI said they're not attractive, or telling them they're not friendly, or not, well, just anything they don't want to hear, the face just dropped immediately. And they walk away like really upset and they walk away. So I was just observing that. I was like, that's really fascinating. Like nobody even questioned about like, where does it come from? It was meant to be for make people think, but you know, it's just being used as this like, you know, fortune telling things from the AI. And I just thought like, that's wrong. That people are actually not thinking. So that made me feel like, okay, I want to do something and involve that in my art practice. And I just want to provoke a bit more. And I just make sure people actually think a bit before they completely emotionally react to an AI program like this. Because, you know, they basically just acting like a machine, like all this human acting like a machine. And so I think that's the start of that. And then when I came back, I was talking to a team in Asia Topa, and I said, well, this is something I want to do in the future. But they were saying like, why don't you just do it now? I was like, well, it was a really short time when I was talking about this. But then I thought, okay, maybe I should just do a, prototype, just give it a test. So it will be a good research for future project as well. So what we did is like, we just bring in a bit like contemporary dance, the visual arts and the music into almost like you go into like say a museum, and you go in there and you see different works, like artworks would trigger your different emotions, and then you get a reading in between or before or after. And I think a lot of people are actually quite like just to test out whether the emotion change then, and if this biometric mirror can capture that, and also make them to think how the arts could change the emotion, or actually it can change so rapidly within like 3 minutes just before after you say something, or maybe the light's different, so you should think carefully before you actually trust what the AI program telling you. So that was a first trial, like, and then after that, what we really wanted, like now what we think about doing is bring into a live show where you have a human musicians to play composed music, and then we're gonna use this biometric mirror to collect audience emotions, and we'll use the change of emotion to connect this to a magnetic electronic piano, which can play the music. This all pre-programmed. So essentially, the audience can mind control the instrument to play with human musicians together. And what's the scary part is, usually when you go to a show, you can lie about things, when you can say, oh, what do you think about that? You go, oh, it's pretty good. No matter what you think, you never say it's bad. Unless with maybe few person, you could say that, but generally you just don't say it. But guess what? When you come to this show, you cannot hide what you think. Because at least it's smart enough to pick up the negative emotions from your face, and it will play on that piano. So I think, when people come to this show, they will have to give consent, and then they will know that emotion will be monitored, in time while they're there. So I think, by asking people to give consent and stress on this, your emotion will be constantly monitored when you're there watching the show. That will provoke people to really think about what they actually sign up for or giving. And hopefully this is just not just coming to having a experience, but also will remind people to actually maintain their own thoughts and judgment when it's come to technology, or how far they want to let the technology into their life.
So deeply fascinating on so many different levels.
And that's the fantastic thing.
Oh yeah, please.
Yeah, apologies. Mindy spoke about mind control and sort of the AI controlling our minds. And in reflecting upon what Mindy just said now as well, how fantastic would it be that actually we start to control the mind of the AI through our behaviors in an audience? Like how, just from a sort of conceptual but also technical point of view, how fantastic wouldn't that be? And also how well connected is that to the theme of our conversation around communication, that we are actually in charge of the AI rather than the AI.
Well, actually, and that is such an interesting point, that in one way, the biometric mirror, the consciousness of it monitoring you encourages you to be self-reflective, but then of course you're conscious, as you just said, of the possibility to create a communal mind state that can influence the AI. What would you say about this idea of the biometric mirror as a model of maybe future creative collaborations between humans and machines? Like, is it sort of paving the way for something even further?
Yeah, look, I think from my perspective, and also someone working in the art and science world, I think others have done it in the past as well. And platforms such as Ars Electronica, for instance, have quite an extensive history with those sorts of collaborations between artists and scientists around technology questions. But I do think that biometric mirror is quite unique in the sense that it is what I call an ethically provocative work. There are a lot of concerns around this work that we have and that we are still dealing with very carefully on a case-by-case basis. So whenever we run the work, so to speak, we really carefully go through a risk assessment, and they're very diverse risks. And I think in that sense, we are quite unique in that we embrace the risk, still persist with conducting research, because it is an active research project, so we collect data, but still deploy it in the public arena and allow the public to voice their opinions, to voice their concerns, and for us as academics and to learn from that what, or how technology should be adjusted to better reflect what society needs.
I guess just really, really quickly on that particular point, with what you were saying before, Mindy, about on the one hand, the absolute acceptance of the AI's diagnosis and the sort of the emotions that come from that. And then on the other hand, the deep suspicion potentially, and, you know, the questions that you're encouraging people to ask about the accuracy of these readings. Is there a really significant amount of education that needs to happen in a public sort of sense as to the value, but the risks of this technology, and how can that education be implemented?
Well, I actually think, you know, like when I wanted to do this project, I actually, it's really come from like, I want to educate people, which I should, you know, who am I? But I do think like that. I feel like, you know, if it's something, probably because in personal life, I do actually, even though I'm an artist, but I love the idea of like, you know, art can work across disciplines. So I've been working with a lot of very cutting edge science project in the past. So I feel like, you know, the first I really feel like I can educate people, or at least I can remind people with my work on about technologies. And not like a lot of people, they think, oh, I'm an artist, so even though I have a feeling of like I have something to say, but it's probably too far away from my practice. But I never think like that. And I think I'm in this process, I'm actually learning as well. And I think this entire thing could take it in two different paths. One is, you know, when we think about AI, actually now, let's say it can be not accurate, and this is something I want to remind people to think, but which I just talk about it. But another side is that actually one day it can be pretty accurate, and when that happens, what we're gonna do? For example, like a lot of technology is, or big companies that are already sort of using this to use data to generate, to make decisions on what they do. Like I remember a couple days ago, one of my musician friends sent me an article about one of the music platform actually using, actually somehow access to your cameras and your microphone while you're using it, and to listen to your background noise, and so they know when do you listen what songs and what's your reaction to when you listen to that song, so which is quite scary. And this thing's actually really taking on different paths. So I think I do think, let's not call it educational, but it's more about reminding people of what we're actually facing, and it could really go different ways, and we should be just mindful about what could possibly happen. And yeah, I guess that's yeah, my answer. Yeah.
Thanks, Mindy. Jody, I'll bring you back in a second. I just wanted to ask Niels quickly. I guess I'm really fascinated by, different forms of intelligence and the difference between how humans know and how machines know. What would it take for machines to engage in a world, with the world, in a way that's similar to humans? Because that's not kind of happening at the moment, is it? There's that sort of sensory perception that we experience the world that's missing.
Wow. Yeah. Unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to answer that issue today, but I think, look, in my practice, I take a very co-design oriented or user-centered design oriented, if that's even a word, approach. So I really do believe if we want to reach a point ever in time where machines symbiotically sort of live with us and for us, then it can only really happen through I guess, yeah, truthful forms of co-design. And I think that's really the issue with a lot of technology. Yeah, I'm a white male, and unfortunately a lot of white men, develop the technologies of today and of tomorrow. So that in itself is already a really good and painful illustration that we're never, well, at the moment, we're not reaching this state of symbiosis. For instance, looking back at AI, AIs and facial recognition systems are notoriously bad at detecting different skin tones for a very simple reason, because they're all developed by white men. And this is technology that's already fairly established. I mean, facial recognition is fairly novel, but even your digital camera, that has some sort of technology built in to often sort of focus on faces or pick up skin tones. And that has the same underlying problem. And that's only the tip of the iceberg. It's really that lack of co-design and lack of involvement from the public. Once we tackle that, I think we are heading in a good direction. But then the question is, what wins? Is it dollar value or is it social value?
I guess, Jody, to bring you in here as well, what have you learned from your investigations in this field? Maybe some of your reflections on the human, the sensory way of learning and communicating. Maybe what's your experience of kinesthetic intelligence, that body intelligence?
If you don't mind, I'd like to add to some examples I've seen of AI in that space in connection with kinesthetics. I'm so glad you said that, Neil, because I think that too. I mean, in the circles that I've been, especially futurists, a lot of them sit in conferences, and I would say, I've often said, what's disability futures? What's the futures around sign languages? And they're like, oh, because those people aren't in the room. And I'm all for AI and machine learning, as long as it's consensual, of course, and ethical. But look, there are a couple of examples you might have seen going around on social media, some nerds building a glove, and they say, this is going to interpret sign language, and it's just a glove. But like I said, sign language is not just one articulator like a tongue, it's the whole body. So, but there are avatars that are being created, particularly in the UK and in France, by deaf people working with stop motion cameras, and it's so beautiful. So you see this moving, and it's led by people who are fluent in the language. And there you go, co-design. That's where it can work. There's also another project I know of, I believe it's for the City of Melbourne. They're working with deafblind users using, I think, Google Maps and a haptic cane. And so the cane vibrates as in which way they want to go with the map. And, so this, but they're working with those users. So I'm aware of really beautiful projects like that. And I guess, I've seen another one, I was working on a project in Geelong, and it was how do we translate dance to blind people? And so there was a robot that moved and did the dance, but it was very rudimentary, of course. It was only in its early stages, but there was a lot of potential there because the people were in the room. So yeah, in terms of, the thing is though, the human touch, the thing about Imagine Touch is that what I learned working with deafblind people, and as someone who's grown up in this space, is that I think touch is actually the most important sense for human beings. I mean, we are created through touch. That's how we are made. And also, it may be the last thing we feel as we leave the earth. But as you can see now, it's social. We're all socially distancing. You can see how much we need each other. And often touch and that kinesthetic feeling is, especially in such a visual world that we live in. I mean, right now, it's so visual. Touch is something that's really important to us. And without it, we have nothing. We make love, we eat, we fight, everything is all through here and the kinesthetic. So I'm very curious as to how AI can develop that sense of intelligence. When Mindy was talking about the music, the AI is literally mind bending the audience. It's almost like, how is it manipulating the heart and feeling of human beings? And it's quite amazing and beautiful in that way. And yeah, I'm excited to hear about this conversation. Yeah.
Well, Mindy, I wanted to ask you about this too, from the point of view of a musician. When you're learning and playing an instrument, you're using your physical senses and feedback. How much of studying the guzheng is learning through this body intelligence?
Like physical, learning. Sorry, did you mean how much there's physical in the learning? Well, actually, I have to say it's probably the guzheng is a traditional musical instrument. So when you learn from that, it's totally from very traditional way, and it's discipline. It's like you sit there 8 hours, so you just do one thing. So you actually grow this muscle memory of something, and that's the foundation. And you learn many things. But later on, when I find the freedom is, it's not through that. This memory actually already come into your body. You inherit it like from everyday life, and then when you can, it became something like you can't describe it, but it's there, and then therefore you can start to do different things, to improvise, to expand. But the physical, one thing I want to touch on, actually. I've seen Jody's work as well, and also we have lots of friends, for example, Maddie and team, really familiar with each other. So from Jody's work and all, I would, talk, I feel like, we would share the same source. Performance, even though for music, it's a very, very physical thing. And when you play music, it's not you just delivering a sound wave. You actually, how you move your body, how you hold your breath, how you release everything. It's part of the performance. Would actually enhance your music as well. So I would say it's like, physical movement. It's a very, maybe touch to today's conversation, is very important for communication. I really totally agree with Jody. It's from different perspective, it's important. So just you actually see people rather than just hear them. That's a complete different thing. And of course, in Auslan language, it is the priority. So I don't know. Does that answer the question about the physical? Yeah, music. Yeah.
No, definitely. We wanted to get to see some potential audience questions as well. We should mention, if you've just joined us and you had any questions, you can type them in the Q&A section down the bottom of your screen. Maybe we can ask this to each of our panelists. We wanted to talk about studies in AI and machine learning teaching us about empathy. Niels, can you program or code empathy?
You picked out the easy questions for me. Can you code or program empathy? Oh, look, I'm sure there will be computer scientists that say yes, and I'm pretty convinced that at some point we'll be able to achieve that as well. I just don't think we are there at the moment for exactly the same reasons that I mentioned before. I think we need more women in the field, and without wanting to I guess, advertise for the School of Computing Information Systems, but I do think we have a pretty large cohort of women, and I think that is really promising. That's definitely a sort of growing evolution in Melbourne, in the universities in and around Melbourne. That's absolutely what we need, but also, as Jody and Mindy point out, we need much more diversity, gender diversity, ability, just to inform the discipline and indeed better understand, or at least allow the white men to better understand what empathy entails, and how that, if at all, how that can be programmed into lines of code. That's a long-winded answer to say, at the moment, no, but hopefully, yes.
No, it's a very apt answer, because as you say, it speaks very much to the need for greater inclusivity, communication, connection, and a greater diversity of voices and contributors. And on that subject of collaborations, we have spoken about some specific examples, Jody, but collaborations is really right at the heart of your creative company name, Jody Mundy Collaborations. And I guess empathy is an enormous part of what you're generating and encouraging others to experience and to develop. Could we ask you to sort of extend a little bit about the ways in which you are creating the conditions that empathy can thrive in? How are you achieving that?
Yeah, it was funny because so much of the work I do is in collaboration with so many people, with like the communities that we're working with, and then the artists, and then the funders, and the venue, and the festival. It's, you know, and there was a time where it was like, oh my God, it was like connecting the dots. And now that I'm heading Fuse, I can really do that now, because there's like a huge program of many, many artists. But look, for me, it really is about connecting the dots, I suppose. And the conditions, I think the conditions that I aim to create is authenticity, that is artist-led, that we have as many people represented as we can from as many cultures. Like in the Fuse program, which that launches on Thursday, fusedarabin.com.au, that program has, you know, First Nations through to artists of colour, through to artists who are deaf, to, like, there's such a wide range of artists. And I think it's about relationships, and I feel like I'm just stating the obvious, but it's about trust. It's about being awkward. It's about, you know, if it does get clumsy or misunderstood, how do we build that trust, I think. And I think maybe as someone, because I grew up, you know, in the deaf community, and, you know, it was a very isolated community back then. I mean, now we're more integrated. I mean, there's still a lot more work to do, but it's more integrated. I think just my knowledge of growing up as an interpreter for my family, and just seeing the progress of disability rights improve over time, has enabled me a skill that is how to listen. And that's why I meant deaf people taught me how to listen. So whoever I collaborate with, it's just holding, it's a holding a space, it's a listening, it's what can we do, and let's get it right, and let's not do this half-hearted. Let's find as many people as we can to listen as well. And I don't know, That's how it happened.
Oh, well, that's incredible. And
working. So
but
yeah,
it's an incredible achievement to be able to sort of manage all of that, and as you say, to build those relationships of trust and to give the space for people to feel like they're being listened and acknowledged. It's such a powerful and powerful thing. So yeah, really extraordinary. And I guess on that subject of holding space and of also creating connections, Mindy, we were also very interested to talk to you about your practice and maybe about music in general, your philosophy of music, and what is the place of empathy in music for you?
Well, I guess, empathy is like, it's what you have to be able to create art, because you have to really have a feelings and feel for others, feel for yourself, and understand others. You have to be really sensitive to be able to, I have to say, to be an artist, because essentially arts is a way of communication. And they always say, no matter visual art, painting, or music, it's language, it's cross culture, and language, all sort of boundaries. So it is a way of communication. So when I think especially what I'm doing is basically just coming in and introduce a new language to people, like where my music is actually a very new thing for musicians. Even like when I first came to Melbourne, I have to say, it wasn't very easy to find collaborators, because people are just not really know what it, it's like, I play this instrument and people are like, oh, what is this? Not everyone's as adventurous as you think they would be. But through time, then now it's just, it gets easier and easier, because what we do is that when people look at this, there's more people collaborating with me, and there's more people wants to collaborate with me. It's not because they didn't want to do it at the beginning, it's just because the people are fear of different things or strange things. And I guess this is the thing I think about, even for artists, this like the fear is such a strong thing there. So for anything strange, people would feel like that. Maybe this is nature. So empathy is really, I feel like it's something we learn rather than we grow with. And I have to say, human beings lived on the planet Earth for 1,000 years, and we still haven't developed to just naturally have empathy. We still, many people, they probably didn't even learn until very late, like in their life, or someone might understand better when they're young. But it's really a thing that's why when you ask Niels about if AI could have empathy, I was laughing, because I thought, like, we haven't, human hasn't even nailed it yet, and now we're talking about it. So, but anyway, I think in my practice, it is all about a connection. It's all about empathy. It's all about like understand each other and bring people closer, bring culture closer. And yeah, so that's my priority. That's what my art focused on. Yeah.
I reckon if ever we develop an empathy AI, or whatever we call, give it to one of the former US presidents. And I think that would be an absolutely fantastic test case if it works on some of those.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Yeah.
You just said something, Mindy, just before about connections. And I guess in your music practice, it is such, as you say, a very important component. In your artist bio, you speak about your vision to make a deeper reciprocal connection between Australia and China.
Yeah.
Could you tell us a little bit about some of those collaborations that you have undertaken and the connections that you're making?
Sure. Just talk about all my work, like actually, quickly mentioned something like, I composed for Australian Art Orchestra in the last couple of years, and did the first ever Guzheng and chamber orchestra piece about the Silk Road that has been like performed in many places in Australia, and then actually took them to China. So this kind of project had happened a lot in the past, where I physically bring music and musicians between these two countries. But also, I think one of the important things, like for example, this year I'm doing one thing I'm really excited about is the collaboration with the Deborah Cheehan. So for the first time, I think, I feel like I'm about to do something and work with her and be able to bring this like Chinese ancient culture and influence together with First Nations art influenced work. We actually, the music we're working on for a First Nation artists, like visual arts as well. So this is something like this kind of a project really excited me a lot, because while we're working together, we actually talk a lot about like what is the similarity between First Nations music and the Chinese ancient music. A lot of people probably haven't really paid attention, but it's actually all come from they all like focus on, for example, on nature, and they all used to pass down stories, as a documentary way for, in the history. So this is something I'm talking about, like bringing Australia and China like in a deeper connection. And also, for example, like the project with Team Shell, like the single I just released, by this is a project that actually started with many years of VMDO, Victorian Music Development Office, and Creative Victoria, and me and those actually Australian delegation went to China for a conference, and then we meet with labels, and we meet with a lot of people in the industry in China in the conference. After we came back, we kind of invited some of them come back to Australia for the Music Week, where I was moderated panel and helping to host them while they're in Melbourne. But this is how we start the relationship. So this year when I was releasing that music, what we did actually amazingly is that we actually have one piece of music, one EP released by two labels joined together, one in Australia, one in China. Usually you only release with one label. So this is, and by doing so, we're linking not only me, but like different labels to Chinese publishing company, actually the biggest one in China. And also we sending more artists to China in the future to create more market for them. So this is something I'm also interested, like by me opening, build this bridge, there will be more people can benefit from that. So yeah, that's kind of like different directions about my work, which is not actually, I think, more about others, not only just about myself. So that's, yeah, what I think it's about, this bridging and deeper connection.
Yeah. Brilliant.
Well, I just had a look at the time, and I think we only have about 5 minutes left of our session. Obviously, there's so much to get to with this very broad topic, but maybe we'll end with maybe a couple of final questions just for each of you. Maybe to come back to, if someone's watching today and a takeaway from today's discussion, how can we be better communicators, and what are the biggest boundaries to overcome in this respect? Niels, we'll start with you.
Well, if I look at the technology world, I think it's really almost summarizing what Jody, Mindy, and all of us have talked about. It's about touch, it's about trust, it's about sensorial experiences, rather than those distant, but convenient, don't get me wrong, but those distant technologies that kind of provide us instant gratification, rather than long-term, life comfort. I think that's the sort of takeaway for me. I'm not I like to think of myself as not too much of a negative person, so I do think we can achieve that state. I think, as Jody pointed out, there are really interesting art exhibits that explore that world. I'm conscious that there are also lots of academics in that field. It's really a matter of getting industry on board and convincing them what I said before, that it's not necessarily just about the dollar value of products and market penetration and whatever fancy terms they associate with those things, but it is really about social value, social impact, and tangible benefits for those in society that need them.
How about you, Jody? How can we be better communicators, and what are the biggest boundaries to overcome?
Ironically, I think since we've all been in lockdown, we've seen more presence of access than we've ever seen before. We have a transcript that's happening right now. We see interpreters on the news like we've never seen before. It's funny, it's taken us to be apart to understand the nuances in our community. And so in that way, that's been amazing, but then the barrier has been not being able to be together. I guess my hope is that if life ever does go back to normal, that these things don't stop. For the first time, we're seeing, participation on a level that we've never had. And I'm just hoping that doesn't get taken away because it gets too hard, or because that would be really disenfranchising for a lot of people. So yeah, I think everyone's empathy has increased because of, and especially Victoria, far out. We are awesome, in how we are looking after each other, even though it's been fucking hard. But the empathy there, I think, is really strong. Our inclusion mandate has stepped up, and let's just keep going, keep this empathy and looking after each other as much as we can.
Well said. And Mindy, how about you? Any final takeaways?
I just totally agree with everyone. And I very deeply feel for what Jody said is basically what I think. Everybody should just pay attention. And I think there's maybe one thing I could add is just always remind yourself, that's what I do to myself as well, that every single person you meet is a human being that essentially they're very similar to you. So for example, I always tell people when you look at a Chinese something, don't say Chinese, whatever, because the government doesn't mean, a government is something, and this individuality is sit there, it's just a human being. They feel happy just same as you do. They probably like a nice food, a glass of wine, and they love their family too. It's just, they get sad when they can't see their family. It's just same thing. No matter what kind of a country you come from and what kind of a color you have. And so just always remind, it's actually quite difficult. I think a lot of people forget about that, especially when you read news. But let's just keep reminding ourselves, even the people we may not like that much, they still have share a lot of similarity with us. So yeah, so that's probably my takeaway. Yeah. Thank you.
Well, thanks so much to all of our guests. Unfortunately, that is all we have time for in our session of surroundings today, but we want to say a big thank you to Mindy Menwang, Jody Mundy and Niels Wouters for joining us. And a huge thank you to the MPavilion team as well, especially for being speedy in getting this event up online, as we were meant to be at the hub at Parkade together. Hopefully next month we'll be able to do that. And thank you all for attending the session today as well.
Thank you so much. And I did just mention, Lauren, yes, next month, Tuesday, 23rd of March at Parkade, Lauren and I will be presenting the third in the surrounding series. So I hope you can join us there. We'll be sort of speaking with artists and curators who make the city their workshop, lab and playground, sort of talking about experiments in public, making space for creativity and finding new frontiers of festival design and festival programming too.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.